Live from Washington, I'm Aisha Tanzeem, and you're watching Access Point. Hello and welcome. The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, issued a new report yesterday that discusses Islamophobia in the U.S. I have a copy of the report right here. You can also find it on CAIR's website. We'll discuss this report, but also talk about whether Islamophobia is a big issue in America and what Muslims need to do to change the situation. Joining me in studios is Corey Saylor, the National Legislative Director for CAIR, and on Skype with us is David Shanza from the Triangle Center of Terrorism and Homeland Security at Duke University. Gentlemen, welcome to Access Point.
Thank you.
Corey, America, like many societies, has people with biases. There's racism, there's anti-Semitism still in some segments of the society. This report somehow suggests that Islamophobia is in a different category. Why?
I don't know that we're saying it's in a different category. We are saying that it's at levels that concern us. So let me give you two examples. In 2010, Time magazine came out with a survey that said that about a third of Americans were willing to not let a Muslim run for president. That's actually in violation of the Constitution. So you have a third of Americans willing to not respect constitutional standards to keep a Muslim from running for president. More recently, Public Religion Research Institute found that 30% of Americans think that Muslims are here to subvert the Constitution. So you consistently have this 30% level in a lot of different surveys of Americans thinking that Muslims are a threat to this country, and that's pretty significant.
Now, we wanted to find out why Muslims have this negative image, and we had a lot of response on our social media platforms. Let's go to Sarah Zaman, who collected all that information. Sarah?
Aisha, on our social media platforms, we asked people who do they think is responsible for the negative image surrounding Islam and Muslims in the West. Now, our commenters are mostly people from Pakistan, so their take on this may be a little different from that of Muslims in other countries. But for many of those who shared their thoughts, the reason behind such perceptions is mainly Western propaganda, they think, and particularly by what they call the Jewish lobby. On Facebook, Talha Sheikh says the negative image about Islam in the West is because of the eternal animosity they have against Islam. He asks, if every religion has good and bad people, why is Islam singled out? Some people also believe media in the West is responsible for propagating a negative image of Islam and Muslims, while media in Muslim countries they believe is at fault for not countering it. Nazir Ahmed says there is no Islamic media that could spread general knowledge about Islam and Muslims. The West gets incorrect ideas about Islam because of poor communication skills of the Muslim scholars. And he also thinks that sectarian divide among Muslims creates a poor image. But Abrar Hussain points out that the negative image of Muslims in the West is a product of circumstances spanning decades, divisions among Muslims, improper use of social media technology, and media's immature handling of issues is perpetuating this image. Now, we also spoke to folks on the National Mall here in Washington, D.C. to get their take on this issue. Here's what some of them had to say.
I think a combo of the extreme radicals and also just lack of information. People don't realize that the extreme radicals are just like a small portion of everything else, and they just need to realize it's a much broader religion and much more similar to like other religions that people realize.
Muslim, I think, was just a very unknown thing, and a lot of people just judge it, and they don't think about where they come from. Like, it's like any other culture.
So here's a little window into what people in Pakistan and the U.S. think about this question. To read more, log on to facebook.com/accesspoint with AT. Now back to you, Aisha.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Corey, I love this one, the Jewish lobby. If you're in Pakistan, the Jewish lobby is behind everything. So let me ask you once and for all, are America's Jews all against America's Muslims? Is there a lobby that's denigrating Muslims in America?
Absolutely not. I mean, certainly we have our differences with certain parts of the American Jewish community. But in reality, as in many states in this nation, they've attempted to pass anti-Islam legislation, it's been members of the Jewish community who have been our biggest supporters, because they understand that if Muslims are discriminated against legally, the same can happen to other minority faiths. So we have found that the Jewish community in this country has been among our major allies.
Now, David, let me come to you. We'll come back to this theme of Islamophobia and the things that are in this report, but I want to ask you, there is actually a genuine national security concerns in some circles because a war has been declared against Americans by some people who claim to be from the Islamic faith. Do you think that those two are separate, and how do you differentiate between the two?
Well, as Corey mentioned, it's a small sect of Muslims who have a very distorted view about what the Quran requires them to do to defend Muslim people and Muslim faith, who are behind the terrible attacks that have taken place in New York and around the world, and people in Pakistan, of course, are no strangers to that. I think part of the problem with Islamophobia is, and that's not a term that I like to use because it blends the source of so many different strands of thinking into one term. But the problem is, I think what I see domestically is that if there are people in the United States who are disaffected for one reason or another, they're an unsettled immigrant, and they feel blowback and discrimination and a message from the majority of our society that we don't feel that they belong, that they can't be part of the American fabric, then there is a threat that those individuals could further radicalize and maybe even move to violence, and that's the danger behind it.
Well, thank you very much, David. I want you to answer what he said. Individuals who feel left out, getting more radicalized, and maybe going out and committing an act of terrorism. How big of a threat do you think that is? And do you think the Muslim community is looking at it as it should?
Well, David's reporting actually shows how big a threat it is. It's not as substantial a threat as many of our media pundits would want us to believe. However, any threat must be recognized as a real threat. And I think the American Muslim community has been substantive in its response to that threat. We know from the reporting of, say, for instance, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, that American Muslims were involved in a large percentage of cases where al-Qaeda plots were stopped before they could manifest.
Let me add something here, and I want both of you to comment on that. Can you really blame people when you have instances like the Times Square bombing where Faisal Shahzad, who was well integrated in the society, had a job on Wall Street, his kids played with the neighbors' kids, and all of a sudden he's turned radical and gone crazy? Even people like me, my friends were asking me, how do we know the next person's not going to go crazy and try something like that?
I don't blame people for having a misunderstanding. Absolutely not. 10 years after 9/11, we recognize that it's on our shoulders, the American Muslim community's shoulders, to help people understand that the images that they were that introduced them to our faith, airplanes hitting buildings on 9/11, are not representative of the faith. However, when Timothy McVeigh, who did a terrorist attack in Oklahoma in 1994, it wasn't all white people that were blamed for his attack. And so the problem that we have, and the thing we want people to think about, is every particular outlook has its extremists. The entire outlook should not be blamed for those extremists. Not every white person is to blame for what Timothy McVeigh did. Not every Catholic is to be held responsible for what the IRA did in Northern Ireland. We're beginning to see in the United States that that's beginning to happen, because after the Boston bombing, particularly among young people, a poll found that they were beginning to disassociate Islam itself from the violent actions of a few who are twisting the faith.
And David, are you finding that that's happening? Because when you have something like the NYPD allegedly spying on Muslims, that helps radicalize more people. How do you stop that from happening?
Well, I don't know if we have specific evidence that has caused specific individuals to radicalize. I don't think it's a helpful tactic, because of some of the things that I said before about pushing the Muslim community away and making people think that they're not, entitled to the same rights and privileges as other American citizens. But in terms of preventing radicalization among the community, it's a very hard task. These are people who, if they're coming to community forums and they're very highly integrated into a mosque or a healthy a Muslim neighborhood or anything, they're very unlikely candidates for radicalization. It's the people who, have something that happens that's gone wrong with their life. Usually, really happy people don't move towards violence. And then they latch on to this ideology and they they read about it on the internet, and they're probably not very schooled in the principles and the teachings and the writings of Islam, because they are duped into believing that they have a religious duty to take violence in the defense of Muslims and the Islamic faith, which is just not true. So it is very hard to see the telltale signs unless they, do other criminal acts and take some sort of overt steps. The authorities' attention often isn't drawn to them, and then the community, they might be so disassociated from the community that other than people who are directly close to them, like their family members, might not really know that they've changed in this way.
So if they don't go to the mosque doesn't know that they've changed. Let me come to this report. This report suggests that in America, there's actually, Corey, a group of people, you've described the inner core, the outer core, whose job is to malign Muslims, particularly the inner core. What do you think is driving that?
So in the report, what we do is we outline 37 organizations that we found are essentially dedicated towards spreading prejudice and fear of Muslims. What drives them? A number of different things. Nativism is clearly one of those things, a fear of the other. That drove also movements against Catholics when they first came here in this country. Unfortunately, there is an element of Israeli-Palestinian conflict that underlies a lot of the pushback that we see from some of these elements. And then from others, I think it's just a mere, it's a prejudice. We've seen prejudice in this country since its founding. It's been directed at pretty much every minority. We're the ones in the spotlight right now, have been since September 11th. And so they target this particular community. That changes. When immigration reform comes up, it tends to be the Hispanic community that gets targeted more than us.
But a lot of money, you've mentioned hundreds of millions of dollars.
$119 million
$119
over 4
million.
years.
Where does that come from?
Well, that's what we're still looking at. What we know right now is we found that these 37 organizations, at least, and this is a very conservative estimate, over a 4-year period between 2008 and 2011, had $119 million in total revenue. Now, where that always comes from, that's the next step of the question. We know there's some foundational money there, and we also know that there's some interconnectedness among the organizations where they donate to each other. But the names of the donors, we don't always have that. We do have a very few. We know that a Chicago business named Bear Said gave $17.8 million to Clarion Fund to distribute an anti-Muslim film. We know a gentleman in Tennessee named Andy Miller gave large sums of money to anti-Muslim candidate Luann Zelnick. So it's still being developed, who the real big fat cats behind this movement are.
David, I wonder if you've had a chance to read the report. It's just come out. And what do you think? What happens in terms of counterterrorism when this kind of thing happens?
Well, I've read a summary of the report, and also I'm familiar with the report called Fear, Inc., put out by the Center on American Progress. And this, number of years ago, this seems to be in many ways a follow-on. Listen, these folks are not doing counterterrorism any favors by funding this. And let me tell you why. I was discussing with a State Department diplomat whose job it is to do engagement with the Muslim community around the globe. And they asked a group of students here at Duke, how many of you know the name of the pastor that burnt the Quran the other day? And maybe one of 30 students, not the other day, the other year, 30 students raised their hand. And she said, everywhere I go around the globe, Muslims know about this individual, know about this incident. And that was 1 out of 300 million Americans. But that terrible act of bigotry resonates around the Muslim world. It flows with lightning speed on the internet. It has the power of video attached to it. And those are the kinds of things that stoke anti-American sentiment that can, cause many different kinds of national security and foreign policy problems for the United States. So I think the people who are donating to these causes, if they think they're really defeating terrorism, I think they're really, it's actually counterproductive, and they're making life worse and for the United States here and around the world.
Well, thank you.
It's worth following on something with that. I also think that sometimes the United States doesn't get the credit it deserves when there's pushback against anti-Muslim sentiment. So to use the example of Terry Jones, the pastor that David was just talking about, he actually tried the same trick again this past September 11th and was actually arrested on a number of different charges, including driving a vehicle loaded with kerosene when he wasn't supposed to, and now faces felony charges. So free speech is free speech, but when somebody crosses the line, the government will step in. They deserve credit.
And I remember when he actually burnt the Quran, the U.S. media didn't carry it. They made a decision, not censorship, but a decision that this kind of act doesn't need this kind of...
I disagree with you on that. They carried it pretty heavily.
When he burnt the Quran, the mainstream media didn't carry it.
One of the unfortunate things is that I think he got his 15 minutes in the spotlight because the media picked that story up. And if they had not, it would have been some lonely guy in the middle of nowhere pushing something and nobody would have noticed.
Okay, well...
Which is what should happen.
You mean the second time when he actually burnt it, or the first time when he threatened to burn it?
The
first time when he threatened to burn it, the story got very well.
The second time it was the overseas media.
The second time when he actually burnt the Quran, the story, the media didn't cover it, which was, I guess, a mature decision. But we wanted to also find out what Muslims can do to counter some of the negative imagery. Let's go back to our social media desk where Sarah Zaman's waiting for us. Sarah?
Aisha, as you mentioned, and as we know for quite some time now, the biggest question on the minds of many in the Muslim community globally has been that what can its members do to improve the image of Islam and Muslims? On Facebook, Zafar Hussain says, if Muslims study the Quran and Sunnah and act upon it, they will be the world's most successful and peaceful people. Muslims and Islam are pulled apart nowadays, and that is why Muslims are suffering all over the world. Altaf Baloch suggests Muslims have to change their thought process. They need to embrace modern sciences. Islam is a living system and it should be allowed to evolve with changing times. Muslims should openly accept new points of view and thoughts. And Nasra Khan believes our leaders should act on Islamic principles, but she says no matter what we do, enemies of Islam will never appreciate it. Now, for most of our commenters, the answer is in the religion itself. But the people that we spoke to here in DC think the solution is more of a social nature. Let's take a look.
I think the best thing would be reach out to their American neighbors and get to know each other. I think if we become more friends, invite each other over for dinner, learn that we are all the same people.
They have their own faith and beliefs and religions, and we don't really know what they're going to do next. So what I think they should do is really communicate more with us politically, socially, and have some type of communication with us to let us know what they're going to do next.
So you heard the comments. Now for the expert's take, we'll go back to Aisha and our guests.
Thank you very much, Sarah. David, I'll come to you for that. This fear, we don't know what they're going to do next. How do you deal with that?
Well, my suggestion for Muslim American communities, there are a lot of groups, and they go out and they denounce terrorism. Groups like Corey's, they say the right things, but my suggestion would be stop thinking and talking about terrorism and get out into the community, do good things, be positive citizens, run for the school board, get involved. And yeah, definitely open up mosques and your homes to visitors. Don't be shy about sharing your religious practices. This is actually a very religious nation that is respectful and I think honors people of faith. And so I would say get out there, be open, and do good. Go out and do good deeds and be solid citizens.
Let people know who you are.
To turn this around.
Yeah, let people know who you are. Now, I want to ask you something, Corey. Do you ever find yourself answering for acts that Muslims may commit in other nations?
Oh, absolutely. We're all held accountable, unfortunately, for the acts of a crazy few. And I have been in many situations where people have started saying, well, Muslims in this part of the world do this. What do you say about it? My response is, well, anytime you have an African American here, do you ask them about the war that's going on in the Congo right now? I'm not responsible for what those people do. The faith here, though, does have a serious problem in community's eyes, because it was 9/11 that introduced most people to our faith, and then subsequently what they saw is crazy guy in a cave waving a sword, threatening death to America. And David is absolutely right. One of the things we suggest to people is you have to go out. You can't stay in your mosque. You must be part of your community. You must live in that community. I would strongly disagree, though. We have to continue talking about terrorism because every feedback we get all the time from PR experts is that our condemnations aren't reaching the average person's ears. So we have to continue doing that so that they can see and understand that we as leadership, that we as a community do reject it. And the third thing that you have to add as well is that we can't stick our heads in the sand. So when you try to do a mosque expansion and someone attacks you for it, you have to push back within the law, using all of the common tactics that have been taught to us by advocacy groups and the civil rights movement in this country. But this is a country that respects people that stand up for themselves and show the dignity in what they believe. And
now,
it doesn't respect people
but
that put
here's
their
my
heads in the
question,
ground.
though. Yes, you're not answerable for acts happening outside the
Sure.
U.S., but don't you need to sometimes stand up and explain your position vis-a-vis the faith? For example, remember the film Innocence of Muslims, huge violence around the world. Do you think organizations like yours needed to step up and say, we disagree with this, but we also disagree with what you're doing, whether freedom of speech, I don't know what CARE's take was in terms of freedom of speech on that issue, and I follow CARE.
We do frequently, and you just made my point for me, that even though we went out and did exactly what you said, you as a journalist who follow us don't seem to be hearing it. Which is why, it's that thing of repeat again and again and again. And there are other things that we have done. In 2006, there was a journalist who was kidnapped in Iraq. I got a call from a congressional office asking us to call for that journalist's release. We went a step further. We went to Baghdad and made the call from there. In 2010, we had families come to us who were concerned about the disappearances of their sons. When we reviewed the material, there was issues to be concerned with there. We're the ones who put them in touch with law enforcement. So we are doing these things. It's not getting out. But I'll flip that back and say there's another instance where the community asked us to report somebody to law enforcement because they were doing some very concerning things. And we did so and later found out that that guy was actually an FBI informant. So those are the kind of things that law enforcement is just not doing themselves favors by letting us when we find out that they're spying on us in our mosques when we're abiding by the law, that our leadership who are cooperating, who are with
Trust
politicians
deficit
are
right
being
there.
spied on. Absolutely.
Exactly, trust deficit. David, in terms of intelligence community, how useful is profiling or vice versa?
Well, it's not it's not useful at all because there is no single pathway to radicalization to violence. There is no particular profile.
So let me interrupt you right here. David, let me interrupt you so you can add to it. I'm saying if it's not useful, why is police in several states doing it? I mean, they must find something. They're not illogical, are they?
Well, there's a variety of different approaches, and I don't think we should cast in a broad brush about how the law enforcement communities approach. There are many communities, and we're doing this as part of a research project, where there's very strong partnerships between Muslim leaders, communities, religious people, and law enforcement to build that trust deficit that you mentioned, to work on issues that the community cares about, discrimination, hate crimes, better roads, streets, whatever. And doesn't focus just on terrorism. And then there are other jurisdictions that have chosen to, do a different path, which is, in my view, has led to more distrust and is a dangerous way to go. So there are different tactics out there, and I think it's a wide variety of practices. So I recommend that you go the more cooperative, community-based route rather than a surveillance only. That's going to be more productive in the long run.
Since a lot of us have suggested, including people out on the streets, that we need to get to know each other more, we wanted to find out how Muslims and others living in America could improve that interfaith relationship. Let's go back to Sarah Zaman on our social media desk. Sarah?
Right, Aisha, about this question about the issue of improving interfaith relations on Facebook, Khurram Hanif says, charity work and conferences will help. Muslims should work on countering extremist thoughts and understand what exactly it means to be one nation or ummah. Jamshed Alvi believes we need to stop justifying extremism and openly say that those who commit such acts cannot be considered Muslims. If you don't disown these people, he says, you will be considered a part of them. And Muhammad Nawaz suggests all Muslims and non-Muslim scholars should explain that their religion does not encourage criticizing other religions. They should teach respect towards any and all religions, and governments should support these efforts. Now let's see what some of the folks we spoke to in DC said when we asked them this question.
If things in Iran were to cool down and across, the Middle East especially, it would do wonders for the way people here view Muslims in general.
I know one Muslim that I know for sure is Muslim and I'm not a young guy. So, from where I come from, it's all about the press and other things. It's not about my real life experience.
So there are hurdles on the domestic and international front that have to be overcome as communities work on interfaith harmony. Send us your suggestions and read what others are saying at facebook.com/accesspointwith80 or join us on VOA Urdu's Facebook page. Back to Aisha.
Thank you very much, Sarah. You heard them. Do you think things happening internationally affect interfaith relationships within U.S.?
Without a doubt. We don't live in isolation. Everything around us tends to affect us. What we are losing as a nation is the ability to separate those things sometimes. So we may disagree over one particular aspect of foreign policy, but agree on 5 others. And unfortunately, the entire relationship becomes based on that one disagreement. And I think just, forget Islamophobia or anything. We as a nation need to remember we're all Americans and debate points with that in mind, that everybody has the nation's best interest in mind. These days, unfortunately, it's all sort of degraded into, well, everybody's a traitor to America and everybody's here to subvert it. And I think that just kills any rational, reasonable, productive conversation.
David, do you think Muslims are looked upon as different from the rest of America?
Well, America is built on differences, so I don't think people look at an individual Muslim and say, well, they're different and they're bad, but they certainly might say that they're different, and they are. They practice a different faith. But we pride ourselves on our diversity, and whether it's faith or ethnicity, race. What I want to get back to that earlier question, I feel for Muslim Americans because the average American turns on their television and they do see chaos and disorder. We can talk a lot about, and I'm sure you do on this station, about the causes of that and America's role, but that's beside the point. People just don't make distinctions. They see that and they attach it, whether it's something happening in Pakistan, Iran, or the territories in Israel-Palestine. And they know we've been involved for so long, and they're tired of it, and they attach that to Islam and Muslims, and that just carries over onto their views about American Muslims, maybe even in their community. And that's a very hard thing for Muslim Americans to deal with. It's not even about hatred or Islamophobia. It's just how the world is perceived, I think, because of these international events.
So that's a huge problem, things happening overseas that you cannot control, that shape people's perceptions about Muslims. Corey, what are some of the things CARE does to counter that?
Well, also keep in mind is things that happen here. So the Boston bombings, the community had nothing to do with that, and some of the burden of the blame is laid at our feet. There's no burning bush action that you can take to solve that particular problem. It's something that's going to take time. So many of the actions that we're taking, we've already talked about. We encourage mosques, get out, get into your local community. You don't have to wear your religion on your sleeve, but just be seen and be present. We make sure that we show up in forums where we're not necessarily going to be welcomed, but where at least we can have some kind of a conversation. And then Muslims have to be seen contributing to the overall good of this nation. We've learned that from other minority communities that have been slandered in the past. So as one action that CARE took recently, there were hitchhikers who had been detained by the Iranians. We sent a delegation to Iran along with a couple of Christian leaders in the Christian community and helped them to be released. Those kind of things, you get credit for that.
So I have to wrap up. It's a very interesting discussion. I'm sure we'll come back to this topic. But at this time, need to wrap up. Our guests for this show were Corey Saylor, the National Legislative Director for CARE. And on Skype with us was David Schanzer from the Triangle Center of Terrorism and Homeland Security at Duke University. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your comments on Facebook and Twitter. Until next time, goodbye.